guys ready? Well, good evening. My name is Shane Walker. I'll be your moderator for this evening. Welcome to the Dorchester County State Attorney Candidate Forum for 2022. I want to recognize the organizers of the event, the Dorchester Chamber of Commerce, WHCP Community Radio, the SPY, and Midshore Board of Realtors. Now, we want to remind you the event is being broadcast live on Facebook and YouTube and being recorded to be watched later. And we ask you to share the video link so we can help create informed voters before they go to the polls. Watch the recordings for the 5 previous forums. They are also available. And join in tomorrow for the final forum with the state senator candidates. All links can be found on the Chamber website. That is www.dorchesterchamber.org. Don't miss the primaries coming up July 19th. Early voting will begin on July the 9th. I want to take a moment and review how the forum is going to go this evening. Each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement. They will have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question and a 2-minute closing statement. Our candidates present this evening, Molly Fox, Amanda Leonard, and Kenneth Thalheimer. So we're going to begin. And Kenneth, we'll begin with you tonight. Question number 1. After your opening statement will be question number 1. Thank you for paying attention, Bill. Kenneth, please begin with your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kenneth Thalheimer. I'm a Republican candidate for state's attorney. A little bit about my background. I've been a Dorchester County resident for the last 13 years. I've spent 9 years volunteering with the youth in Dorchester County, coaching both football and baseball at the youth and high school levels. I also was the stadium announcer for Viking football on Friday nights for 5 years. I am a veteran, an 8-year veteran of the Marine Corps. After I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to work for Anne Arundel County Police Department. Unfortunately, I was injured in the line of duty in 2007 and had to retire. That sent me on a new career path that I don't think I was quite ready for at the time, but now it is a blessing. That sent me to the University of Maryland School of Law. Ever since I've graduated from law school, I've been doing criminal defense work. Currently work for the Office of the Public Defender in Kent County. I've also worked for the Office of the Public Defender in Queen Anne's County as well. Some of the time in between retirement and law school, I was also able to work at the Eastern Shore Hospital Center for 3 years, which gave me the opportunity to work with individuals with mental health issues and kind of understand where they come from and how that relates to the criminal justice system while I was doing that. And I've also spent 5 years working in the judicial system with the Maryland courts in Wycomico and Dorchester County. Some of my key areas are I'm looking for increased sentencing for violent offenders and offenders with guns, including new legislation for ghost guns. I would also like to ideally establish a mental health court in Dorchester County, as well as several early diversion programs for juveniles. That's another key area. That'll take care of my opening statement. I want to thank everybody who came here live and everybody who's tuning in for this and watching this. Thank you very much.
She's here. I told you we should practice. Hi, my name is Molly Fox. I am not from Dorchester County, but hopefully for the next hour and a half, I'm going to be able to convince you, or however long we're doing this, I'm going to be able to convince you why I'm the best candidate for state's attorney. I've been a state's attorney, and let me start off by apologizing about my voice. I did lose my voice a couple of days ago, and I've not gotten it back. Normally, I do not sound like this. But I have been a prosecutor for 12 of my 14 years as an attorney. The first 7 of those years, I was in Baltimore City. I began my career as a law clerk in homicide, where I learned pretty much everything I know about trying cases from some of the best homicide prosecutors in Baltimore City. I started off in district court, trying regular district court cases. And then I moved on to juvenile, where I spent 2 years prosecuting some of the worst offenders in juvenile. I actually prosecuted a juvenile homicide case. It didn't go to trial, but it was a case that I worked on in juvenile. And then I went to misdemeanor, where I worked my way through trying misdemeanor jury trial cases, and then on to felony jury trial cases. My time in Baltimore City, I tried approximately 25 jury trials, got my feet wet, learned the process, got comfortable in front of a jury, learned how to talk to witnesses, learned how to talk to victims. Then I tried my hand at defense for a year, didn't go well, didn't like it, knew the white hat was best for me. And in January 2017, I was lucky enough to meet Bill Jones, who was the former state's attorney here. He hired me to be the state's attorney. Hired me to be an assistant state's attorney. Approximately 8 months later, he promoted me to a senior assistant state's attorney. And then in April of 2018, he promoted me to deputy state's attorney, where I've been for the past 4 years. During that time, I helped him run the office, and I've prosecuted some of the most violent repeat offenders. I hope by the end of this, you will see that my resume shows that I have the experience and the ability to be your next state's attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Amanda Leonard. First and foremost, I want to thank the Chamber and the other event organizers for bringing us here tonight. I'm happy to be here. Being the state's attorney for Dorchester County is something that I have wanted to do passionately since 2011. The summer of 2011, I was deciding whether or not to go to law school, and I did my first legal internship in the Dorchester State's Attorney's Office, where I got to assist with and help CA through the successful prosecution of a particularly brutal case of a daycare worker charged with homicide of an infant in her care. From that day on, through my time in law school and my past 6 years here in the Dorchester County State's Attorney's Office, I have dreamed of being your state's attorney. I'm from this county, I grew up here, and it would mean nothing more to me than to be able to give back to the community that's given so much to me. I've spent the past 6 years working in the state's attorney's office, being the voice for victims of crime in district and circuit courts, prosecuting both misdemeanor and felony, nonviolent, violent offenses, drug offenses. And on February 4th, I was appointed your ad interim state's attorney, meaning I'm acting as the state's attorney when the vacancy was created by Bill Jones being appointed to the circuit court judge. Judge Wilson and the other members of the First Judicial Circuit decided unanimously that I was the qualified and best candidate to fill the position of acting state's attorney February 4th through the time of this election ending. Like I said, I'm from Dorchester. That is not the only reason that you should vote for me. It's by no means the reason that Judge Wilson appointed me to this position. I'm in this position because I'm qualified and I'm the best candidate to serve you, Dorchester County, because I understand this county, I care about this county, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that it continues to be the safe place that I've grown up and loved it to be. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, all the candidates, for your opening statements. Amanda, hang on to the microphone for me, and we'll begin the questions with you. What should the top priority for the person filling the state's, what should be the top priority for the person filling the state's attorney position?
So public safety has got to be key for a person being in the state's attorney's position. Every resident of Dorchester County deserves the most basic fundamental right of being able to go to their homes, walk in their neighborhoods, be in their local businesses without fear of anything bad happening to them, without fear of theft, without fear of violence. So the state's attorney's office, through the state's attorney down to all of their assistants and all of their support staff, need to do the best that we can to put together cases that are strong to hold criminals accountable for the actions that they take here in Dorchester County. That's going to be done through smart, effective, and diligent prosecution. But the state's attorney's office can't be expected to do that alone. This has to be a community-wide effort. There needs to be collaborative efforts among the state's attorney's office and its employees with our law enforcement agencies, our partner agencies such as Department of Social Services, Department of Juvenile Services, Board of Ed, community members. When there are combined efforts from those communities at large, we are going to see better outcomes in our community, and we will then be able to be more proactive in stopping the crime that we're seeing, rather than right now where we're simply being reactive to the crimes that are currently plaguing our community.
So in my response to the top priority for the person filling the state's attorney's role would be ensuring the safety of this county, which is similar to what Ms. Leonard said, but with transparent, equal prosecution of criminal offenders. It's no less simple than that right there.
So obviously, I think we're all going to have the same answer. The top priority is public safety, because public safety is what the job of the state's attorney is. It's to ensure public safety. The state's attorney is the lead, basically the lead agency in dealing with crime in this county. We obviously partner with the police department and the citizens to prosecute these cases, but the state's attorney is probably one of the biggest positions for public safety. Right now, public safety is we have a problem right now with safety. Violence is as high as it's been. When I first came to Dorchester County, the first year, we had one shooting, no murders. I remember turning to Bill Jones and being like, "You guys have serious violent offenses here?" And then it took off. And now we average approximately 3 murders a year. I have been the primary investigator on 6 homicides since I've been here and since I've been deputy the past 4 years. In that time, I've closed all of those homicides in the first 2 weeks. They're all solved, and every case that has gone to trial, I've successfully gotten first-degree murder convictions. I believe that public safety also includes the smaller, more public nuisance crimes, because those also are crimes that affect everyday life. So public safety doesn't just include the violent repeat offenders, the people with guns. Those are certainly people to target, but the nuisance offenses, the ones that affect quality of life, where people are everyday lives are affected by people stealing from them or people taking things or malicious destruction or things of that nature. Those are the kinds of cases that we end up having to prosecute hard as well. I believe that right now we are at a point where we need to make sure that public safety is addressed and it is addressed swiftly and quickly. Thank you.
Hang on to the microphone for
Sorry,
me.
thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. How has the drug addiction in the county impacted law enforcement, and how do you suggest we address it?
Drug addiction is a serious issue. Drug addiction is something that has been plaguing every community, and Maryland is in particularly hit hard because of the influx of heroin in Maryland. I think it is important that officers be trained in Narcan, and they are, and they have the ability to Narcan people. I also believe that we need more treatment programs for inpatient drug treatment. I believe that addiction is something that needs to be addressed because it can lead to crime. It can lead to people causing even doing violence as a result of a drug addiction. It certainly leads to property crimes and crimes of that nature. But you give people chances, you give them drug treatment, you give them inpatient drug treatment. But at some point, if people continue to offend and continue to cause problems in the community, there has to be an alternative. And that alternative could potentially be placed on supervised probation or placed in jail, because you only can, I mean, drug addiction is a problem that lasts. Don't get me wrong, it lasts a long time and it's hard to get through, but it is really important that we hold people accountable, because in the end, they cause problems in the community, and if they don't get the proper treatment, they will likely end up offending. And I believe that we need more treatment programs and we need more ways to address it.
Drug addiction in our community is most certainly the root cause of a large number of the criminal actions that I've seen in my 6 years prosecuting. Our law enforcement officers are already tasked with going into high stress and situations where they may not be knowing what they're encountering and preparing for physical violence. But now on top of that, they have to be prepared for the threat of chemical violence from heroin and fentanyl that they're potentially going to be exposed to. On top of that, we all know that, yes, drug addiction does correlate to drug supply being brought into this county. So there are drug trafficking organizations here in this county connected to the increased rates of violence, the increased presence of guns on our streets, and are a major threat to our public safety. So we at the state's attorney's office need to aggressively prosecute those that are responsible for manufacturing and bringing these controlled dangerous substances, this heroin, this deadly fentanyl, into our community. Those that are unfortunately afflicted by CDS addiction deserve to get the treatment that they so badly need so that they are not going to continue on with continued criminal acts. If we have repeat offenders that are not taking advantage of the treatment programs that are available, then yes, they need to be held accountable for those crimes. But the more that we can do to address these drug users issues, the more that we're going to do in the long run for preventing the suppliers from wanting to be here in Dorchester County and keeping all of our residents safe. We all know that drug use is not something that discriminates. I'm sure everybody that's watching this on the live stream and everybody in this room, by some way or another, has a connection to somebody who has been impacted by drug use. So we as a community, we at the state's attorney's office need to take steps to better that here in our county and make sure that everyone knows we don't accept it here.
So I would reiterate on that. Drug addiction has impacted law enforcement. It's caused an uptick in minor property crimes and serious property crimes. Those individuals affected by that drug addiction, simply put, will feed that drug addiction any way they can, and sometimes that's by committing crimes. I do think that we are benefited in this county by having a very good problem-solving court, which offers drug court. That does give our citizens a chance for recovery, and they go full steam ahead at that. There are counselors that help them with that, and I think that is an excellent program. I do think that we need to have something also address juvenile issues with drug abuse and drug addictions. There needs to be some form of juvenile drug court, in my opinion. I also feel that sometimes we need to weed out those individuals in drug court that are taking it serious and those individuals that are using it just to game the system. Because unfortunately, I think that's a big problem. Sometimes they're using that problem-solving court or those rehabilitation as a shell, and they're not really looking for it. They're just trying to get out of jail. And we just have to do a better job at recognizing who those individuals are and enforcing that a little more sternly and sending them to jail, quite frankly, for wasting the court's time, for wasting the judicial system's time.
Very much. Hang on to the microphone for me, please,
Yes, sir.
Kenneth. How would you, and we're trying to learn this by your responses to all of these questions, but we'll ask you directly. How would each of you handle the job differently than the other candidates in the race?
So I think, quite frankly, this is a difficult question to ask, especially for me. I work full-time in Kent County. Ms. Fox has never done the job of state's attorney yet, and Ms. Leonard has only done it for 4 months, so I'm not sure how either of them would perform in the office. I can only speak as to what I would do, which is to prosecute crimes fairly in a transparent manner within the rules. I would also use my position as state's attorney to address the legislature, to ask for increased penalties for violent crimes, for crimes involving gun offenses, and for new penalties for crimes involving ghost guns, to include mandatory minimums in some of those sentences. I would also use my position to work in the community more, to get out there, to let the youth know within Cambridge, within Dorchester County, that we're here for help. And if you need something, you can turn to us. If there's an issue, you can come to us. You can let us know. We're here for you. We want to help you. We don't want to just put people in jail, but if it comes to that, that's what's going to happen. But we need to be there first to help the community.
Excuse me. Like Mr. Thalheimer, this is somewhat of a tough question because like him, it's hard to know how the other candidates would run the office. Mr. Thalheimer has never been a prosecutor. And like Mr. Thalheimer said, Ms. Leonard has only been, prior to 4 months ago, she was an assistant state's attorney. So all I can look at is my history. And my history is that I'm the only candidate up here who has ever tried a felony case. I'm not sure how we elect somebody who's never tried a felony, much less a homicide, because right now we have a lot of homicides happening in this county. In the past 6-week period since announcing my candidacy, I've tried 2 homicide cases and got guilty verdicts in both of those in about an hour. One of them is facing life without parole. The other is facing 2 life sentences or life without parole. In the past year, well, prior to that, I've had total of 13 jury trials since coming to Dorchester. That's not counting the approximately 25 jury trials I had in Baltimore City. But since coming to Dorchester, I've had approximately 13 jury trials. I've gotten guilty verdicts in every one of them. In the past year, I had tried a gentleman who was assaulted police. He actually got the worst of it because they sucked the dog on him and the dog bit him. And I remember the defense saying, "You're not really going to try this." He got the worst of it. Thankfully, none of the officers were seriously injured. But I said, I absolutely am, because all he had to do was submit. And I tried that and got guilties on that and attempting to disarm the law enforcement officer. And he got 23 years. I then tried a woman in October who was part of a 6 co-defendant bank robbery case. She did not enter the bank, but I had to work with other people in the community and with the law enforcement to figure out who she was, that she planned it, and with the getaway. And you're in for a pound, you're in for a penny. And as a result, she was found guilty of all 31 counts, and she's doing over 20 years. And again, the 2 homicide cases I tried. All I can say is that I will continue to try cases. I don't believe in necessarily playing out cases to get rid of them. I think it is important to try cases and hold people accountable. Thank you.
So I do come into this race with a little bit of a different perspective than either of my fellow candidates for a couple of reasons. One, I am your state's attorney right now. I was appointed by the top judicial officers of this county and the First Judicial Circuit because, again, they believed that I was the one qualified for this job. So 4 months is still 4 months either, or more than either of my other candidates. I'm the only one that has gone through the process of preparing a Dorchester County budget and following that through. I'm the only one that has been running the office solely really for the past 4 months and taking this. So the other two candidates, if they are elected, are going to have to do on-the-job training that I will not have to do because I've been doing it. And I will continue to do it through January when the election is final. I have been here in Dorchester County also for my entire career. I knew that this is where I wanted to be. I knew that this is where I needed to be to complete my legal career. So I came here from the start. I have been in district court. I have been in circuit court. I have done violations of probations. I've handled the Department of Natural Resources docket. I've handled the juvenile docket. I've been involved with the problem-solving courts. There is not a single docket in Dorchester County that I have not been a part of. Well, no, Ms. Fox is correct. I have not tried a felony. I was supposed to have 2 prior to this debate here tonight, but one is unfortunately on pause due to some issues with the case, and the other had to have a new attorney appointed to him. So those will be coming forth, and I expect to do very well with those cases. The other thing that makes me different from either of the candidates here today is, again, I am the only one that is from Dorchester County, and I've spent my entire life here. That doesn't mean that I'm the most qualified just because I'm from here, but it means that I understand this county and its people. And it's something that makes me, I think, inherently more trustworthy than the other two that just don't understand the people and the ties that I have to this community.
Thank you, everyone. All of our candidates so far have alluded to gun crimes at some point, either in their opening statement or in some of the questions that they've answered. So with gun violence at alarmingly high levels in our community, what criminal justice reforms would you seek and support as top priorities, and why?
So first and foremost, I do firmly believe that our Constitution gives us these fundamental rights, one of those being the right to bear arms. So I'd like to make a very important distinction that the gun violence that we're having here in this community is not by our lawful gun owners. It is by those that are possessing guns illegally. It is those that are prohibited from having guns based on their prior criminal history, based on their probation status, alarmingly based on their age of being under 21. The state's attorney needs to make sure that there is a priority at prosecuting those that are using these guns for ill intent, that are using these guns with violence against one another, that are using these guns to further their drug trafficking in our community. We need to prosecute them, hold them accountable, forfeit those guns, and take them off the street. That includes the prosecution of the ghost guns that Mr. Thalheimer has referred to, that he indicates he wants to have harsher penalties for, that are already on the books based on the new reform that just came through a couple of weeks ago with mandatory minimums. We do need to enforce those things, not only for the safety of our community, but to protect those that are lawfully using their guns.
And to echo a lot of those sentiments, I do believe that we need to seek out and enforce a higher level of sentencing for any offenders that are convicted of violent crimes where a firearm is involved. Those crimes are a particularly heinous act. It takes a particular level of awareness and thought to commit a crime while possessing a gun. And I think possessing that gun while committing the crime does put that over the top, and those crimes need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent that the law allows, to include seeking maximum sentences for some of those offenders, to get them off the streets and keep them off the streets. Again, the ghost guns is a huge concern within the state, within the city of Cambridge even. We have to stop that before it gets here. It's already rampant in Baltimore, and we don't need it to be rampant in Dorchester County. We need to get out in front of that and attack it. So in conclusion on that, the increased sentencing needs to be supported for any violent crime offense, any offense that involves the possession of a gun in commission of that crime.
Illegal possession of guns is a problem in this community. And one of the big problems about illegal possession of guns is that it tends to encompass people who lawfully possess guns. when people start talking about possession of guns, they sort of incorporate the people who lawfully possess them. And like Ms. Leonard said, we're talking about people who illegally possess guns. It's not guns that cause the problems. It's the people. It's the people behind the guns. You have to take into account the offender. You have to look at the offender. You have to see what that offender has done previously that prohibits him or what he is doing with that gun at the time. The problem is right now, most gun offenses, use of a handgun in the commission of a crime of violence, wear, carry, transport a handgun, crimes like that are misdemeanors. They need to be felonies. They need to be more of a deterrent for people because people know the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. You make those crimes felonies, and in appropriate circumstances, not every circumstance, but in appropriate circumstances, you do seek the mandatory minimums. You do try and enforce that. Most people don't even enforce the mandatory minimum for wear, carry, transport. There's a 30-day mandatory minimum just for possessing a gun without a permit, without a wear, carry, transport permit. If you're walking down the street and you're not supposed to have that gun, there's a mandatory minimum of 30 days, but it's usually not enforced. It needs to be enforced so people understand that that itself is a crime that will seek 30 days in jail. You must serve those 30 days in jail, not suspended, not on the box. That's the whole point of the legislation. We have laws on the books. They need to be enforced correctly. They need to be enforced against people who have illegal possession of guns. And we also need to make more gun charges felonies and seek the mandatory minimums when appropriate. Thank you.
Speaking of policy that are on the books, what is your opinion of the changes recently enacted by the Maryland General Assembly regarding policing? For example, repealing Law Enforcement Bill of Rights.
I think it's ridiculous. I think right now the police department has been villainized. The police in itself are deemed to be the enemy. And it's, I can tell you right now, based on a conversation that the Dorchester Sheriff's Department had with Ms. Leonard this morning, where she talked to them about these new laws being enacted, I've had several call me today and say, I'm out. I'm not doing it anymore. And that is a problem because we need police. We need people on the streets who want to police. We need people who don't fear that if they do policing and they do it correctly and they do it the way they're supposed to, that they're not going to be targeted. They're not going to be jailed. They're not going to be killed. Officers right now are running scared. There was an officer who was just killed in Wycomico County because he had his taser out and not his gun. I firmly believe, and we'll never know, that was because if he had his gun out, he was fear that the legislatures and the attorney general's office would come after him, because that is where we are right now with policing. But law enforcement is not the enemy. Law enforcement needs to feel that they are supported and that they can do their job. And when you take away things like their Bill of Rights and you take away ways that they can do their job correctly, look, nobody likes a dirty police worse than a police officer. Police officers are going to hit the dirty police worse than anybody. And the state attorney's office is going to hold anybody who's not a good police officer accountable. But that is a rare exception. Most police are good people. And the problem is they're not supported. They don't, and that means they don't want to do it. You can't get people into the job. You can't get people who want to stay in the job. And when they are in the job, they're afraid to do it because they are afraid that they are going to be taken to jail or charged with something. That's not the way to look at police. Police are not the enemy. Police are who we need. And I work with police all the time. And I'm telling you right now, they are good police in this county. Thank you.
Just want to first start. They didn't call and say they were running because of their conversation with me. The Law Enforcement Bill of Rights and the new Maryland Police Accountability Act that takes place on July 1st is a scary thing for law enforcement. The Law Enforcement Bill of Rights was not in place to be this catch-all immunity for any malicious act engaged in by a police officer. It was there to protect them for when they are making a split-second decision that may be a life or death situation that doesn't necessarily have the best consequence. It was there for those protections. And I think that repealing that and these additional liabilities for police is an ill choice from our legislators who just don't spend the days in the shoes of law enforcement and see what they have to do, or what we as prosecutors are dealing with, or what defense attorneys are dealing with. Unfortunately, our legislators just aren't in that position, and so they aren't making the decisions that are best for our community. I firmly believe that the majority of men and women in our law enforcement are good people and that want to do this job for the right reasons, but they also want to go home to their families. The repeal of these Bill of Rights and the addition of these liabilities, I think, is going to be something that we will see a long-term negative impact until a change is made. It makes the career of law enforcement less desirable for those seasoned veterans who have been here, and it makes it less desirable for those young individuals that may have wanted a career in law enforcement, but find this maybe isn't right for me given what the stakes are. Our law enforcement officers deserve safety and protection in what they do, because ultimately, if our law enforcement officers aren't safe, then we as citizens aren't safe either.
Thank you. As a retired police officer, I can assure you that I was quite disgusted with the repealing of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. By repealing that Bill of Rights, the only thing that the legislature has ensured is that good officers are going to leave the force. Good officers aren't going to stand around to be accused when they have to make a split-second decision, and then someone else is going to have weeks and months to Monday morning quarterback the decision that they made in a split second. With that, the repealing of that Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, the state's attorneys will then now have to turn over any complaints to defense attorneys, even if those complaints are unsubstantiated on that police officer's record. And that's just not fair to anyone, because those then get used to discredit that police officer on the stand, even though that complaint against the police officer was never substantiated, it was never founded, but now they'll be able to use that, and it's just not fair to the police officers. And quite frankly, it's forcing those good police officers from the force, and it's keeping them from being able to hire good police officers. I've talked to many people out there that being a police officer is just not a desirable job right now. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to face that increased scrutiny every day of their life and worry about, am I going to make it home at the end of the day? Is my wife and kids going to have somebody to support them at the end of the day? And by repealing that, unfortunately, they've left some officers no choice but to leave the job and find jobs elsewhere.
Let's stay on the topic of police and the relationship to the state's attorney's office. We're going to go to question number 11. I'd ask you to please describe the ideal working relationship between the state's attorney's office, local police forces, sheriff's office, and state police.
So I believe that relationship has to remain, professional at all times, but it also has to include constant and continual communication between the office of the state's attorney and those departments. They have to constantly talk about the updating of policies, the passing of new legislation, the ruling of court matters. All of those have to constantly and continually be discussed between the offices. That way we can ensure that police and the state's attorney's office are continuing to prosecute crimes the most efficient and the best way that they can, quite frankly.
I agree with Mr. Thalheimer that when the police need to have an open line of communication, or law enforcement in general need to have an open line of communication with the state's attorney's office. They need to feel that they can call the state's attorney's office with anything, and the state's attorney's office needs to feel that they can speak with the police about things. We need to work together from the beginning to make sure that these cases are developed strong. There's a reason that law enforcement shall advise the state's attorney whenever there is a homicide, because it is important that the state's attorney get involved from the ground up. I know when I was promoted to deputy state's attorney, I think that Mr. Jones felt relieved, because there was a time where he didn't answer his phone when a homicide happened because he slept through it. But he knew that the law enforcement was comfortable enough to call me, and they did. And I came out and I handled the case. I've probably received over 500 calls from law enforcement since I've been in the office at all hours of the night. Last Friday was my 5th-year wedding anniversary. I left dinner to go to Cambridge Police Department because they called me about a big bus that they had, and they really wanted me to come talk to the guy, and I really wanted to go talk to him, and so I went. I thought my clothes were going to be on the front lawn, but they were not. I will say that it is the most important part of this job. I always, at the conclusion of every trial, I always tell my officers, you're going with me to speak to the victims, or in the case of a homicide, the victim's family, because it is so important that they understand that the police officers are the ones who are doing the work. They're the ones solving these cases. Certainly, we are a resource for them. Certainly, we can assist them, but it is the police officers who are doing the work, and I want them to get all the credit. I'm literally just the puppet master in court who's helping direct them. They do the work, and I know that they need our support and we need theirs. It is a relationship that is intertwined, and it is a very important relationship. And I think they know I've got their back and they have mine. Thank you.
So the state's attorney's office is responsible for taking on any criminal case that law enforcement charges, reviewing it and determining if there is enough evidence to, charge if they haven't made the charging decisions already. And then once it has been charged, to make the prosecutorial decisions from that point on. In my time here in the 6 years, I feel privileged to have developed relationships with members of our Cambridge Police Department, our Dorchester Sheriff's Office, Maryland State Police, Hurlock Police, Natural Resources Police, and the other federal agencies that often work in our county as well. Our law enforcement agencies are investigative bodies, and the state's attorney's office is the next cog in the wheel that keeps that ball rolling so that we can secure convictions and keep our streets safe. The relationship between law enforcement and the state's attorney's office has to be one of mutual trust and respect. The officers need to feel comfortable coming to us with questions, and we need to feel comfortable going to them with our advice. So together, we are putting together the best case possible. The time working in the district court from the ground up, I got to develop more working relationships with the guys that do the road patrol, because a lot of their cases are in the district court. Now that I've been more in the circuit court over the past 4 or so years, I've had the opportunity to work more with the detectives that are involved in our criminal investigation divisions. And now as the state's attorney, I've been able the past 4 months to develop some of the stronger relationships with the administrative bodies of these agencies. And I believe that those relationships are crucial to an effective prosecution. If that relationship between the state's attorney's office and law enforcement is not strong, the public is going to feel the negative impact of that strained relationship.
Question number 8, talking about the relationship between the state's attorney's office and law enforcement agencies. Let's go to the next portion of carrying out justice. And I want to ask, what do each of you perceive as the greatest obstacles to justice?
The 6 years that I've been here, I think one of the biggest obstacles to justice that I've found is the unwillingness or fear of participation in our criminal justice system. Oftentimes you see that with victims of domestic violence, who for any number of reasons don't want to come forward or continue on with a case. It may be that they're concerned about how that's going to affect their family dynamic if there's a conviction. It may be that they rely on their partner for financial support, and if they're convicted or locked behind bars, then they can't necessarily get that. We have witnesses of crimes who fear coming forward, sometimes for retaliation, or then we've also got individuals who just have a general distrust in police or the criminal justice system as a whole and don't feel comfortable coming forward or reporting crimes or things that they've seen. Those serve as barriers to the successful prosecution. But I think that as a state's attorney, you need to provide yourself and be a presence that people feel that they can come talk to, that victims can trust, that witnesses can trust. So that you earn their trust so they can feel comfortable participating in what is likely one of the most uncomfortable things that they'll be doing in their lives. Victims having to relive their most traumatic events, witnesses having to testify against loved ones, things like that, is something that we have to deal with as state's attorneys. And I believe in my 6 years, I have developed a relationship with victims and given a reputation to myself of being someone that victims can trust, can come to and talk to about the process, to answer questions about how it may go forward. And hopefully we will be able to bridge that gap and make that the not biggest obstacle that I've been dealing with in my next 4 years as your state's attorney.
Thank you. For me, I think the biggest obstacle to ensuring justice currently is current legislation, bail reform, the current legislation that will go in effect July 1st that repeals the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, as well as the change in sentencing guidelines for property and drug crimes that begins on July 1st as well. I believe all of those hinder justice being done. We've made it easier for people to be out on bail when they should be held without bail. Allowing those individuals out when they should be locked up allows them to commit more crimes, to victimize more citizens, and the potential that they kill somebody. If these individuals are locked up, those future crimes, they never happen. And that's what needs to happen. We need to ensure that these individuals are locked up from the beginning and don't get a chance to reoffend.
I agree with both the other candidates that there are both of those aspects those aspects are hindrance to the greatest obstacle to justice, I believe, like Ms. Leonard said, is people not wanting to be involved. And it's not the community doesn't want to be involved, because the community cares. The community does want to be involved. In fact, the community is tired of all these shootings. They want to be involved because with all of these shootings I've probably been out on over 10 shooting investigations. And I can tell you, within moments, we know who did it, because the community will tell us. It's another thing to prove it, because people don't want to come forward. They want to tell you behind the scenes. They want to be the behind the scenes kind of people. Everybody will tell you. I can't tell you how many witnesses in homicides and in shootings will say, yeah, I'm not testifying. I'll tell you, but I'm not testifying, because there's that stigma that if you testify, you're a snitch. And people will tell you all day what happened, but if you have to testify to it, that changes things. I recently had to lock up a young woman, mother of two, to force her to testify in a homicide trial. Didn't feel good, but it was something that I had to do to get the conviction on a homicide case. I think that right now we've got to have a way that, through experience, through talking to people, that we make them comfortable. We make them understand. I've said to a countless number of witnesses, victims, I haven't lost a victim or witness in my 12 years of prosecution, and I'm not going to start with you. I have the experience to know how to protect people, how to get people to talk to me. That was one of the reasons I went in last Friday to talk to this gentleman on this bus, and he decided the only person he wanted to talk to was me. And we sat there for 2 hours, and I finally called it quits, and he continued to want to talk, but I had to call it quits. I think that there's a way that you talk to people to want to get this information, and you way to make them comfortable and make them understand that nothing will happen to them if they come forward. But it's a hard thing to convince people of.
Staying on the topic of community engagement, we're going to go to question 12, candidates. Do you feel community engagement is important for the state's attorney? If so, can you give some examples of your engagement in the past and what you may do if elected to the office?
So I'm glad you asked that, because I just literally said that having the community involved is one of the biggest keys to this job. And it's also the key to curbing violence. It's developing relationships with people. Sometimes people who are in the community that you don't necessarily want to develop relationships with, but people who trust you. I have right now a very good person who reports back to me. That person is a very good source. That information is very key. Those are the types of things that you have to develop in order to make these cases and have them come through. You can get the information, then you've got to work it. During my time as a state's attorney, I've been able to go back. I've been able to speak with people in the community about my experiences and get them to trust me. I have also believed that the community needs to trust the state's attorney's office and the police. I'm proud to say that since announcing my candidacy, I have not gone into the chambers with any defense attorney to try and work out plea cases, because I think that leaves the community wondering what is going on behind their back. I also believe that it is important for the community to know that I am willing to try these cases and take these cases firsthand to trial if necessary. People need to feel safe in this community. If they feel safe, they'll be more willing to come forward. I am the mother of 2 small children. I've chosen to be a part of this community. I was not born in this community, but I've chosen to be a part of this community. My family and I built a house here. We moved here 2 years ago, and this is what we call home. I have been out in the community with my children, and I hope to continue to engage the community and let them see that this is a great county and that we are on the way to making this violence go away and this place safer.
Community engagement is 100% important for the role of state's attorney. If citizens in this county don't know who their elected officials are, then they can't have any trust in what their elected officials are doing for them. The state's attorney is an elected position that ultimately speaks for this community and, like we've said before, is a presence for public safety. If the community doesn't know who I am or how I'm engaged, then I am failing them as my constituents. Since my appointment, I have participated in every community conversation that has been put on by Moving Dorchester Forward. February, we had one that was actually targeted toward public safety, and I was asked to be one of the key speakers along with the chiefs of the law enforcement agencies. I have participated as a volunteer in the Student Success Conference, trying to point individuals of youth into appropriate education and career choices so that they know that they are worth something and they can move forward and look forward to something after their school years. I have initiated contact with the local magistrate and the local gentlemen's club, which is a group for middle and high school aged boys to have educational guidance and kind of peer motivation and guidance outside of their homes, mentorship that again is targeted at making them better individuals outside of the school and how to be good kids in our community. I have supported the recent opening of Mary's Sanctuary, which is a refuge for women that have been victims of human trafficking that is put through and been opened through Harriet's House. I can remember times when I've been younger walking the tracks at the high school during Relay for Life. You have to be engaged in the community. I intend to offer my support as any way as I can, as I have as assistant state's attorney, as your interim state's attorney, and hopefully as your state's attorney, so that people can see me both professionally and personally involved in our community.
So clearly, as the other two said, community engagement is hugely important for the state's attorney's office. For me, I've spent countless hours volunteering time with the youth within Dorchester County in the last 13 years, be it on the baseball fields, on the football fields, in high school with the kids in high school, mentoring some of them during football and baseball seasons, as well as working with the local leaders when they were doing the track and field events for the youth out there at CSD. That is one of the most important things I can think of in my life, is to give back to the community and give back to the children, because they're our future, and without them, there's absolutely nothing. I would continue to be as transparent and visible in the community if I'm elected as your state's attorney as I am now. I just think that's hugely important for any elected official to be out there, to be approachable, to know that they can come with you, that anyone can come up to you and ask you a question and they'll get an honest answer. They'll get my time regardless of where I'm at. If I'm at dinner with my wife or if I'm at the mall with my kids, if they want to come up and ask me a question, they should absolutely feel able to do that and that there won't be any recourse. And that's kind of how I believe.
A couple of you have alluded to children and how important they are to the success of our community. What do you believe to be the root causes for the high numbers of juvenile offenders that we're seeing? And what changes can the court system make to reduce these numbers?
So for me, I think looking at a lot of these increased juvenile offenses, I think a lot of it have to stem around the COVID and the shutdown of schools and the shutdown of recreational activities. You, as the old adage goes, idle hands are the devil's plaything. You took all of these things away from kids, young kids, middle school age kids, high school kids. You took their friends away and you gave them nothing to replace it except for a computer to sit in front of. And that is just absolutely atrocious. They need that peer-to-peer interaction every day. That's how the human brain develops. That's how we develop and socialize with each other, by having that interaction. And I couldn't imagine ever going through high school and not going and just looking at a computer screen. That, to me, that was one of the largest problems in the increase in juvenile offenses. They just didn't have anything productive for them. You took away those things and you didn't give them any positive role models. You just left them to their own accords. And unfortunately, we've seen what was happening. That was not an effective or appropriate response to that. I think the biggest thing we need to do is we need to establish these programs. We need to get back out into the community. We need to show these kids that we care. We need to provide them with these positive role models and programs that can take up that time that they don't have anything to do, that can provide them with something positive, whether it's, teaching them how to cook or teaching them how to manage a budget or teaching them sports. All of those things are productive ways that we can work with our youth. And I think that's a huge, important thing.
I agree with Mr. Thalheimer that one of the big problems with COVID, I agree with him that because of COVID, children weren't in schools. They weren't with their peers. They were on the streets. I don't necessarily think they were behind the screens watching the classes or doing their homework. I think they were on the streets. And I think they became easy targets for the older influences to get them involved in what they're doing. I've been working with Cambridge Police Department on what's happening in Cambridge, and there's a lot of violence between two distinct groups, and those groups have been recruiting the younger kids to do a lot of these stuff that's the shootings, the things that we are worried about. We've had juveniles being killed, we've had juveniles as suspects, we've had juveniles with guns. I think that is because their older influences are there trying to encourage them to do the activities, because they know that down the line, nothing happens to juveniles in juvenile court. Juvenile court is a joke to many. I know that the point of juvenile court is reform and not to deter and sort of hold people accountable per se. It's really more about reform. And so a lot of the juveniles think, okay, well, I'll go to a few classes or I'll do whatever they want me to do, and then that'll be that. But I'm not going to jail for the rest of my life, or I'm not going to jail for long periods of time. And it's an easy target for the older people to say, hey, you guys do this because nothing's going to happen to you. So I think that those kids who are in the juvenile system, they need to be held accountable also. They need to be if they're on probation, they need to go to the schools and make sure they're going to school every day. If they're not going to school every day, then they need to violate them. They need to figure out what programs they're in. They need to get them into programs. I do also agree, as a community, we need to have more community activities for the juveniles so that they don't look to these older influences to get them involved in things that they're doing that are not good behavior. I think that the juvenile system needs to be reformed, and I think that we need to hold these kids accountable when they do things in the community. Thank you.
Talking about reforms. I'm so sorry.
I get a turn. I have an answer. I'm not sure if there is one root cause that we can say is leading to the increased violence with juveniles or the increased crime for juvenile offenders. Just like I can't say there's one root cause for everything that happens for an adult criminal. Each case has to be viewed with a totality of the circumstances type of approach and an individualistic eye. That being said, one of the things that I've seen in the time that I've now been working in the juvenile system is there is a common thread a lot of the time with a lack of engagement in their education, a lack of engagement in the mental health services that are being put there for the kids. And that oftentimes comes from the family that's just unable to get really involved and know what's going on with their kids. Unfortunately, to some extent, there are broken families that are unable to support their kids the way they would necessarily would like to. Parents don't always know where their kids are. Teachers, unfortunately, at this point, don't always know where their kids are. And it's not going to get any easier for us. On June 1st, we did have juvenile reform that limits more of what the courts are going to be able to do with our juveniles. It limits what our law enforcement officers are going to be able to do with our juveniles. And I do have fear that that's going to lead to increased juvenile crime. Certainly the state's attorney's office and the courts need to do everything we can to continue to hold these kids accountable, to offer them the services that are in place to rehabilitate them so that they don't become adult offenders. But we also need to have a bigger community engagement, because the courts can't be expected to raise our children. Families need to be the ones raising our children, holding their own kids accountable, and coming forward when they need the help so that we can give the help that we have available.
Speaking of the courts, in the courtroom, when you're on a case, what have been the most effective methods for improving court procedures and efficiency, and what other methods would you suggest?
So courtroom efficiency has certainly increased since the age of technology. In 2016, Maryland rolled out our Maryland electronic filing system. We now have this kind of one-stop shop for filing our pleadings, for sharing discovery with defense, being able to look at important documents relevant to a case. That obviously speeds up efficiency and makes the criminal justice procedure work a little bit easier, so long as the technology is going to work for us on any given day. But I think the efficiency from the state's attorney's office comes from a state's attorney that is organized and good at what they do. If you are organized and good at what you do, the efficiency is just going to kind of fall into place. Since being your interim state's attorney, I have made some small changes to our policies and procedures with the grand jury to make it so that those who are summoned for grand jury service for a period of 6 months know exactly what days they're going to have to serve. So it makes the burden on our citizens who are tasked with coming and performing that civic duty a little bit easier. I would want to implement those small changes that we're going to see minor impacts that will create a larger efficient flow of the office. I think it's also incredibly important for the state's attorney to be willing and able to jump into any role in the office at any given time. We are a small office. Right now we have 5 attorneys and 7 support staff. And if anyone is out on any given day or time for whatever reason, there needs to be a state's attorney and a leader who's willing to jump into any of those roles. Since I've been assistant state's attorney, I feel like I've been one of those people. I will cover a case for any attorney at any time if that's what they need. I have jumped in on a district court docket when our district court prosecutor was sick that day, and you just kind of roll with the punches. And that is how you can show you're efficient in the office and will transfer to the courtroom procedure.
So when I look at the question about what are the recent methods for improving courtroom procedure, I think that one of the benefits that came out of COVID was the ability to appear remotely. And the use of Zoom for some of these court cases, especially, in my line of work on the criminal defense side, it's benefited my side quite a lot. Defendants don't always have to show up in person. Sometimes it's not convenient on some of these hearings for them to make it. They have work, they have other things going on. And I think that ability that the court came out with for the Zoom hearings to be able to do some of these things that you don't actually have to be there in person, if you're just getting new trial dates or advising of rights and things of that nature, that's important. And I think that's one thing that should continue within the courts and the judicial system, is the ability to have those Zoom hearings going forward. I just think it allows easier access for individuals to get to court as far as that goes. Within office efficiency, I know within my office, we have a large database where every case goes into. Within that case goes all of our case notes, any contacts with the clients, any contacts with our social workers, any contacts with our investigators, any mental health contacts. And those are done specifically so if there is some kind of emergency and somebody's not available, that somebody could easily look into that database and see exactly where that case is tracking and what needs to happen. And I think that's something that could be implemented to increase efficiency across the board. That way that if something happens, God forbid, somebody else can pick that up and there's not as much drop as there would be as somebody trying to read this whole thing from the beginning and try to figure out where that case is procedurally.
I wasn't really sure about this question. I agree with both Ms. Leonard and Mr. Thalheimer. I think certainly having the Zoom calls, certainly not having to bring everybody in from the jails and doing that remotely has certainly improved the efficiency of the docket, because let me tell you, it takes a long time to haul people over from the jail, bring them up into court to get a new trial date, take them back out, and we sit there. A lot of court is hurry up and wait, and it takes away time that we could otherwise be doing more important things. Certainly those hearings are important, but the wait in between them is what is killer for all of us. We all sit there thinking, what are we doing? I also agree with Ms. Leonard that it is important to be able to fill the role of other attorneys. Since Ms. Leonard became ad interim, we've been down one attorney. So we are one attorney short. We've been that way since Mr. Jones left and Ms. Leonard became ad interim. And we have had to cover for each other. We've had to handle more cases. We've had to do more things. And as a result of that, we do have to jump in for each other and take over other things. I personally am able to try any case. And if God forbid there was something happened to somebody and we were ready to go to trial, I would be able to step in and do that trial. I think that those are important things that the state's attorney's office can do. I also think it's important to know your case and to have communicated with the opposing counsel prior to coming to court. So there isn't all this time spent trying to figure out what you're doing in court. Or when you're trying a case, you need to have the witnesses, and we have a great victim witness coordinator who helps make that happen. We have the witnesses lined up, ready to go. So as you get trying a case, I roll the witnesses through one after the other, and the court isn't waiting for the witness to get there or whatever the case may be. You have to be on your case, you have to know your case, and you have to be prepared when you come to court. And I think that our office is very good about doing that so that we can be efficient in court.
We've had some partial allusions to technology from all three candidates, so let's stay with that. To question 15, what impact do you think technology is having on law enforcement, and is Dorchester County equipped with the technology that you need to effectively do the job of state's attorney?
So we can always use more technology. But since I've won all my 13 jury trials, I can tell you the technology that we do have has certainly proved efficient for me because I've been able to use it and I've been successful. One of the things I will say that the city of Cambridge has cameras. Those cameras are very, very helpful. My last 2 homicides, actually, believe it or not, were caught on those cameras, which was crucial to being able to have the jury actually see what happened. You couldn't make out who did it, but I was able to use the camera and then the circumstantial evidence or the witnesses to corroborate what exactly happened in those videos. So those kinds of technology, that video surveillance is crucial. And the Cambridge Police Department has done a really good job with maintaining that and using it to their advantage. I do think that there are, there's always room for technology to improve. I think that, right now, all of us state attorneys have laptops. I use mine on the regular. I keep it with me at all times. So I have all that information. And I keep a lot of the stuff on the cloud. I can access stuff that other people can access at the same time. All of those things have proved to make doing this job a lot easier. And of course, like I said, it can always be improved, but I'm very satisfied with where we are right now with technology.
I'm not sure that the county or really anywhere is ever going to be able to keep up with the technological advances that are happening in our country. And most certainly, I'm not sure that any county in this state or any other would be able to afford all of the technological advances that are coming in our county or our nation. But there is an abundance of technology that is at our fingertips. We have the poll cameras in the city. The officers of the Cambridge Police Department and Hurlock Police Department are equipped with body-worn cameras that appear to be crucial in a number of our cases. We have the scientific and technological advances that allow us to look through a person's cell phone after a search warrant is executed. We've got the forensic testing for DNA, for fingerprints, ballistics, drugs. All of that is technology that certainly makes the job of a prosecutor that much easier. But at the end of the day, an effective state's attorney needs to be able to do this job with or without the most advanced technology. If we can't try a case because we don't have the most top of the line technology, then again, we are failing you as your state's attorney. Obviously, there are avenues for obtaining additional funding for that technology. If something were to come about and be apparent to the Dorchester County State's Attorney's Office as a necessary expense for technology, we have avenues to ask the Dorchester County Council. We have funding through what's called our EMSIN grant, which is from the Governor's Office of Crime and Victim Youth Services, that provides funding for sites that are making every effort to stop, identify, detect, and dismantle criminal organizations and drug trafficking organizations. So there are avenues to get that additional technology if we need it, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to do your job with or without that best used technology.
And so I agree. I think technology has assisted law enforcement officers in a positive way. I think the addition of the body-worn cameras, the addition of in-car computers, tag readers, the cameras within the city, the poll cameras within the city, all of those have assisted police in a very positive manner and helped close cases. A lot of those technologies, and like both said, they can always be better. I think the quality of videos could be better to assist, but with what we've got, I think they're excellent resources, and I think the city of Cambridge and quite frankly, the county of Dorchester has done a very good job in updating that technology. They had drones as well. We had a plane at one point too, although I believe the plane has now been decommissioned. It would be nice to get that back into the air. And as Ms. Leonard said, there are hundreds of government grants through all kinds of different organizations, as well as the federal government, if something comes up that can be applied for. And I think that needs to be continually addressed, constantly looking at what grants are available. And if that's something that would assist Dorchester County, I think then that needs to be, gone after and sought for. That's basically free money in those grants for the county, for the law enforcement officers. Each one of those is important.
The topic of protecting our children is extremely important to all of us who have them and to all members of the community who want to see them succeed. So the school shooting tragedy in Texas has many parents asking, what can be done to better protect our children? What do you propose would have the largest impact on the safety of our students?
So I believe the best way to have a large impact on the safety of students is to institute school resource officers in every school, every elementary school, every middle school, and every high school. I think that is the best way to assure that these events don't happen in our schools. If you have somebody that's armed and trained to do that job to protect the people within that school, and they are there and ready when anything comes up, that will deter someone from trying to go into the school, because simply they'll know that there's an officer there that's armed and trained to kill them if need be, if they're trying to get into that school. This can be accomplished, I think, by hiring and training former military retirees, retired law enforcement officers. This gives them something to do after they're out of the military, after they've retired. They can use those years of experience and their training to help protect our schools. And I believe that's probably the best way and quickest way to help protect our schools.
I also am a firm believer in having school resource officers in every school, armed school police officers in every school. I believe it's important to have them trained specifically to deal with the active shooter situation. I think school resource officers, they are not in every school in Dorchester, but they are in some schools, and they provide vital information, regardless of whether or not they're protecting the students. So it doesn't hurt to have them there. I think schools should be locked. I think that it's important to keep the schools safe by making sure that people who come in the schools have identification. You know who they are. You know why they're there. One of the things about school resource officers that I have often found is the school resources officers are another eyes on these students. And because they have other eyes on them, they see who they're hanging out with. They see what they tend to do on a regular basis. They see their demeanor. And when people see that somebody maybe has changed their demeanor, or things, who they're hanging out with has changed, or that they're being bullied or something like that, hopefully there are ways to intervene prior to it becoming too late. I can tell you the school resource officers that we deal with here in Dorchester County are great. And I often call them to find out, hey, who's so-and-so hanging with? What's so-and-so's family life? What information can you give me on so-and-so? Because they are a vital wealth of information just from being in the schools. So I think it's important to have them to protect the students. And they, again, provide another set of eyes for the kids to help develop which kids are going to be maybe problematic, or which kids are going to be in trouble, or which ones may actually come to school and try and harm the school. I think teachers and students need to feel safe in the school. I'm afraid right now Dorchester County is losing very good teachers because they don't feel safe. I think we need to do a better job with that. And I think that that's a very important aspect of Dorchester right now.
So gone are the days where you could simply walk into a school in this county unannounced, unidentified. My mom used to be a teacher at Sandy Hill, and there would be times where I would go after I was no longer a student in the school system and just walk through the door and go to her office and see her. You can't do that anymore because Dorchester County recognizes that safety of our students and our educators is key. These schools now have buzzers at the doors with cameras, so administrators require you to identify yourself before you come into the building. But additional measures need to be taken because sometimes people are able to get through, even if they have what may be identified as a reason to be there, they could potentially still have that ill intent. So the schools should be equipped with metal detectors, school resource officers, even though they may look intrusive. It's my understanding Dorchester County right now is contemplating the rollout of an enhanced weapons detection system that isn't quite as intrusive as a metal detector, but it's specifically designed to detect weapons. I think that that would be great if this county is able to implement that in our schools, because again, we know that a good education is going to prevent additional crime that's going forward. So the more that we can do to protect our educators and our students, the better. Additionally, if we find out that there are people in those schools that are causing threats or causing problems, those are the kids that need to be held accountable. So that would be my goal as the state's attorney.
As we run close to time, I want to make sure there are a couple of questions that we definitely get to. The first being policing residents with mental health issues is a huge challenge facing officers today. What do you believe are the most effective tactics and best practices for law enforcement in this area?
In order to be certified to become a police officer, they do have to go through hundreds of hours of training. And in order to keep those certifications, they have to continue through annual trainings. And a portion of that training is designated to understanding how to assess a situation, and if there is a mental health crisis, how they need to appropriately respond. But as we've talked about in our previous question about the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, we're asking more and more and more of our police officers. We can't expect that our police officers are going to be able to go in and be the social workers and the clinicians that can diagnose that mental health issue on the spot, all while still making sure that they're gaining control of the situation and making it safe for anyone else that's there. Certainly, they do have the training to be able to understand if somebody needs the services of mobile crisis or of an emergency petition and they need to be taken to the hospital so they can get that medical treatment right then and there. But I think the burden needs to then fall on the state's attorney after this has gone through and address what we do with that person that's charged if we feel that they have a mental health issue that brought them into our court system. Is it appropriate to put them on probation and give them mental health services? If it is, they're available to them and we can do that. We as the attorneys and we as the community, we all need to be able to support those resources to make sure that people that are struggling with mental health have an avenue to get help, and make sure that our police have the ways to go into those situations safely, and not be the social workers that have to save the day right then and there.
So I've been a certified police officer and I've gone through that training. And quite frankly, when I was a police officer, that initial training was probably about 2 hours long and was quite boring. It is not as extensive as it should be. And that is probably one of the things that needs to happen. It needs to be a more extensive training. Before I began working at the state hospital here in Cambridge, they had a more extensive training. We actually spent time with the doctors and the psychiatrists and the psychologists there. And they had some kind of practical exercises that we did to show us what it's like to have a day in the life of somebody with a mental illness. And quite frankly, it was eye-opening for me to see what they go through and what it's like to live with one of these diseases. And it's quite difficult. And you understand why they get agitated and why they get frustrated sometimes when you understand what's happening in their life. And I think giving officers a chance to experience that, if you could rotate officers into a state hospital so they could spend a couple shifts watching these individuals, talking to these individuals, I think that has a huge impact and would help them further down the road in the long run to know how to communicate, to know how to recognize someone with a bona fide mental health issue and how they would go about doing it. I also believe that having someone that's qualified, readily available to contact, some social worker of some sort that could help in a crisis that they could call that would come out and help them is always beneficial. So in conclusion, I mean, training is the best thing for officers when it comes to dealing with people with mental health issues.
So officers who go through the academy get 40 hours of training. As part of that 40 hours of training, it is crisis intervention training. Like Ken said, it's brief. Officers are not required to be certified after that. I believe that they should be required to be certified after that. But honestly, I'm not even sure if that certification would really give them the tools that they need to deal with people who are in mental health crisis. And I mean true mental health crisis. Yes, there is a mobile crisis who can come out and assist with them. And that is a great tool for them. But their only other tool is to, if they meet the mental health criteria, to take them to the hospital for an emergency petition. And most of the officers will tell you that that really doesn't get you anywhere. Basically, as long as the person says, I'm not going to harm myself or I'm not going to harm someone else right at that moment, they'll let them back out. And then officers often have to then deal with, if they've committed a crime, trying to deal with that person while they continue to do the booking process. I think there are a lot of people who have serious illnesses and are not being addressed because there aren't a lot of programs. We have people in jail who are waiting to be evaluated, who go months and months waiting to be evaluated. And then if they're deemed not to be competent or to have some sort of issue, they wait months for a bed, and that's a problem. That is people who do not necessarily aren't getting the help that they need. But I also believe that there are a lot of people who all of a sudden, when the police put the handcuffs on them, are having mental health crisis. And I think that those people are the people that the officers end up spending much more time on, and end up basically out of service for people like that. It is certainly after they get to the jail, it is then my office's job or our office's job to determine whether they are malingering or they really do need more mental health treatment. But I think officers are doing the best they can in the circumstances they have.
And to our last question for tonight's candidates, describe 3 key issues you are addressing in your campaign and why they're important to the community.
So obviously, the most important thing that I am addressing is experience, because I believe that experience is what is necessary to do this job. I believe that you have to have the ability to try any case at any point, to be able to run this office and to be able to tell people under you how to try these types of cases. I believe that the state's attorney who once elected should have already tried homicides and know how to put a homicide case down, work with law enforcement to put a homicide case down. I believe they should have experience with jury trials so that they can help those under them with those jury trials. I do not believe that it is appropriate to plea every case out, because those under you will then believe it is appropriate to plea every case out. My second most important aspect is accountability. And accountability is by not just saying to somebody, all right, you want this deal, I want this deal, here, well, I'll just give you that deal. That's not it. It's about holding people accountable and believing that what they did holds a certain standard. You know, it's easy to recommend time served, as they did in Baltimore on a robbery case. That person gets out and he feels entitled. And when you recommend sentence like that, those people feel entitled, they get out and they do it again. You have to send people a message. You have to get serious time to send people messages. And often that does take trial. And if you have to try the cases to then get that serious time. I've gotten life convictions on 3 different defendants, 2 who are still pending sentencing, but 1 who has already been sentenced to life. I've gotten a life conviction on somebody who attempted to murder somebody. Those are the types of sentences that send people the message that we're not playing around here, and that crime around here certainly gets held accountable. And the last thing is transparency. I don't try and do things behind bars. I don't believe in taking donations from defense attorneys. I don't believe it's proper. I believe that everything we do around here should be transparent, and we should be held accountable for what we do.
So they gave us these questions ahead of time, and this is one that, after reviewing all of the other questions, I felt was a little bit redundant, because we've talked about the key issues for the state's attorney. The key issue is public safety. The key issue is addressing our juveniles. It's holding criminals accountable. So rather than spending 2 minutes telling you what's wrong with this county, I'd rather spend 2 minutes telling you why I'm the person for this job. So I could spout off facts and statistics about our crime and our low support for law enforcement, how additional funding could make this better. But I'd rather just tell you why I am the best state's attorney for you. I am not here to address my campaign. I'm here to tell you about, this is my passion, this is my calling, this is what I'm meant to do. I want to be a voice for victims. I want to be a presence in the community that people feel that they can trust and approach. I want to be someone that works with law enforcement, that doesn't tell law enforcement how to do their jobs, but helps them get to the right outcome. And I want to be the person that recognizes we work with a small legal community, a small group of judges, that relationships matter in this county. I've built those relationships over the past 6 years, and I built those relationships in the 24 years before that I've been living here. So I truly do believe that I am the best candidate for this job. If you want to look at the tenets of my campaign, you can check out my website. I'm happy to talk with anybody a little bit more than 2 minutes, but I really do believe that I'm the person you should be voting for.
So the first issue I would like to address in my campaign is mental health awareness, and we did have a question about that. And I think that mental health awareness is one of the largest issues here in Dorchester County. That's why I want to establish a mental health court to go with the problem-solving courts, with the veterans courts, with the drug court. We have a state hospital here. We had a large state hospital here 20 years ago when it was on the grounds of the Hyatt. That state hospital held 650 patients at one point in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And unfortunately, in the early 2000s, they closed that hospital down and they went from 560 beds to 60 beds. That is a large problem because the other people that were in that institution did not get shipped to other institutions. They just pushed those ones out on the street. And a lot of those stayed in Dorchester County. And they're not getting their mental health looked at every day like they were when they were inside that institution. These people were being looked after. They were being made sure that their medications were being taken. They were being provided for. They were even given jobs. They were able to go out to Wire Belt and places like that and do menial jobs to support themselves living in that facility. And that is something that we need to get back to for those with the mental health issues. The second is the increase in juvenile offenses. And quite frankly, we have to have more community involvement, more community engagement with those juveniles. We have to get out in front of this. We have to show them that we care and that we're there for them. And there are other options other than falling into the criminal justice system. And the third issue involves the recent legislation decreasing in sentences. A sentence is issued for the three things. It's issued for deterrence, for punishment, and for rehabilitation. And I think we've gotten way too far with rehabilitation, and we need to get out in front of deterrence and punishment for some of these individuals.
Now invite all candidates to make a 2-minute closing statement. We'll begin with Mr. Thalheimer.
Thank you. And again, so I want to address some information that was provided earlier. While I have certainly never prosecuted a case, I have been a police officer for 15 years. So I have been on the end of investigating cases. I've been in charge of an accident investigation division where I've been in charge of other officers investigating serious and fatal motor vehicle crashes. And while I have not prosecuted a felony case, I've certainly tried felony cases, jury trials, and bench trials alike. In regards to that. So I do have experience trying felony cases in circuit court. I think for me, my passion, my ability to communicate sets me apart, as well as my varied background. So for me, I'm a product of the foster care system. I was removed from my biological parents when I was 18 months old and placed into the foster care system, where I traveled around for a little while until I was eventually adopted out of that foster care system. By two wonderful parents. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us, but they gave me everything I could have ever asked for. And I've, fought ever since I can ever remember. As a matter of fact, I can remember, my parents telling me when they first adopted me, the state told them that I was deaf and dumb. And it was, I think, 6 months before they realized I could actually hear, just from the basis of the abuse that I sustained in care with my biological parents. We've alluded to the budget management earlier. I have worked in big box retailers, managed as assistant store manager for both a big box retailer and a smaller retailer. So I have set schedules. I have managed budgets. I am capable of doing both of those. So I thank you for your time tonight. I thank everyone that has come in person and everyone that has tuned in online and is watching this. I want to thank you guys for looking at this, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I hope that I kept my word and have convinced you that not being from here is not a reason that I should not be your next state's attorney. I started in district court. I rose up the ranks. I went through traffic. I went through misdemeanors. I went through jury trial misdemeanors. I went through felony trials. And then I came to Dorchester. And I can tell you, when I first came to Dorchester 5 years ago, I would never have thought I could run for this position, because at that time, I was not familiar with Dorchester County. I was not as abreast with the county and the homicides and the crime. But I've spent this past year, 5 years, 5.5 years, working in Dorchester County and grown to love it. I call this place home now. I've moved my family here. We built a house here, and this is where we want to be. And during my 5 years, my boss at the time, Mr. Jones, promoted me not once, but twice to his deputy, to his right-hand person. And he and I worked together for 4 years, putting down cases, putting down homicides, and making this town safer. Unfortunately, violence just hit an uptick. But that's not a bad thing that I'm not from here. I'm not indebted to anybody here. I'm not indebted to any judge. I wasn't appointed by one person. I'm not indebted to a defense counsel. I'm not indebted to anybody. I hope to be the citizens elect me, and I can be your next state's attorney, not because I'm part of a good old boy network, but because I can try cases, I can get the guilty. You don't have to wonder with me. You know that if it's your family member or you who ends up being the victim of a crime, God forbid, that if I have the case, that I can try it and I can get it guilty and somebody can be held accountable. And I think those are important aspects. Not only that, I think I am the best candidate for this position. Thank you.
Voting for a state's attorney is not an easy job for a lot of people in this county or in other counties because not everyone really knows what the state's attorney even does day in and day out. And that's probably a good thing because that most likely means they've not been involved in our criminal justice system or legal system themselves or through family or friends. So yes, first and foremost, as you've heard here tonight, time and time again, public safety is the top priority for the state's attorney. But being effective in the courtroom is by no means the only thing that the state's attorney has to do. We've talked about holding criminals accountable. That's clearly something that the top judicial officers of this county thought I've been doing for the past 6 years because I, as an assistant state's attorney, got promoted over the deputy state's attorney to be the ad interim state's attorney back in February. But again, it's more than efficiency in the courtroom. It's establishing relationships with the legal community that we work with day in and day out, because if you don't have those relationships, you're never going to be able to have amicable outcomes in the court. It's about supporting law enforcement in their difficult jobs, offering legal guidance to them, support on cases that they charge, and not just the cases that you pick and choose as interesting. It's working with your partner and allied agencies and your community to find ways to be proactive in stopping the crime that's happening here rather than reactive to what we've already got plaguing our community. It's about hiring and maintaining a staff of competent and intelligent attorneys and a diligent support staff who are going to come to work every day, be proud of where they're working, be happy to be under the the state's attorney that they're under, and be a positive presence in our community. And of course, it's about being a state's attorney that is approachable, that is kind, that is trustworthy. Because like I said before, the victims and families that come to us are coming to us on what might be the worst circumstances of their lives. And if they don't feel that they can trust us, then we can't help them get through. I am the candidate that has already been found qualified to do this job by our top judicial officers. I am more than ready, willing, and able to commit to do this for the next 4 years. So I ask on July 19th, please vote Leonard for Dorchester State's Attorney.
We want to thank all of our candidates here tonight for the Dorchester County State's Attorney Forum, Amanda Leonard, Molly Fox, and Kenneth Thalheimer. We also want to recognize the organizers of tonight's event, the Dorchester Chamber of Commerce, WHCP Community Radio, the SPY, and the Midshore Board of Realtors. We have broadcast this event live tonight, but it is also being recorded, so you can go back and watch it again later. Please share the video link on your social media accounts, send it to your friends to help create informed voters. Watch the recordings for the 5 previous forums. They're also available online. And make sure to join us tomorrow night for the final forum with the state senator candidates. All links can be found on the chamber website. That is dorchesterchamber.org. Primaries are July 19th. Early voting begins July 9th. We thank all of you for watching. Okay. Early voting begins in early July. The primaries are on the 19th. We thank everybody for attending tonight and for watching at home.